What does being the turtle mean?
Ultimately, you must, as a turtle, stick your neck out sometimes and take a risk. The US Surgeon General has said that so many of us are living alone these days and really don't have many people to talk to over a meal. And so just by having dinner, not at a table at a restaurant, but choosing to have dinner at the bar, I think it's brilliant.
Oh, that's what I do when I'm traveling for work. I had such interesting conversations with a shipping magnate when I traveled to Geneva and, really interesting people. Hey everyone, I'm Jean Chatzky. Thanks so much for joining me today on Her Money. We know that our connections to our families, our friends, and our communities are so important. So important that when we don't maintain them, our health and our overall well-being can really suffer. According to a 2023 study from doctors at University College in London, lacking social connection qualifies as a risk factor for premature mortality. It's strongly associated with lower physical and mental health. Essentially, it's telling us that maintaining strong emotional bonds is what keeps us happy and healthy. And this trickles down into all other areas of our lives. Yet at the same time, we also know that making time to see our family and our friends is getting harder and more expensive than ever. And it may feel like enough, yes, that's enough in air quotes, to sit on your couch while you text the people that you love, but really, it's not. Maintaining our connections in real life is essential, and perhaps nobody knows that better than our guest, Allison Gilbert, co-author of The Joy of Connections with the late Dr. Ruth Westheimer. We'll talk about how we can forge deeper connections and show the people we love that we care about them without going broke in the process. So Allison wrote this book alongside the late Dr. Ruth Westheimer, better known simply as Dr. Ruth, and Pierre Lehu, who is Dr. Ruth's Minister of Communications. If you've somehow never heard of Dr. Ruth, no judgment, but she was perhaps the most famous sex therapist in the world, breaking down taboos about sex in the 80s before many people were willing to talk about these things so publicly, before people were willing to get real about things like intimacy and the issues that they were having in the bedroom. She started out with a radio show called Sexually Speaking. Her 1980s TV show, The Dr. Ruth Show, had upwards of 2 million viewers a week. So sadly, we lost Dr. Ruth at age 96 in July, but she left behind an incredible legacy. And thanks to her, we now live in a world where we feel comfortable going to therapy, where we feel comfortable feeling less shame, talking about intimacy and sex. Toward the end of her life, she shifted her focus to writing and thinking about the loneliness epidemic, and it is an epidemic, and how we can all forge deeper connections with ourselves and those around us. Allison is with us today. You guys may know Allison. She is a good friend of the show. She's been here before. She's joining us to talk about that, to talk about Dr. Ruth, to talk about the book and how we can better prioritize the connections that we already do have in our busy, busy lives. Allison, welcome back.
I am so grateful to be here. And Jean, and I count you as one of my treasured connections. And so I am super happy to be here.
Right back at you. And I have to say, I am really sorry about the loss of your friend. I know she was your friend above everything else. And it must be a big hole.
It's fascinating to me how you can get so close to someone so fast. Dr. Ruth and I only met in August of last year, so August 2023. And I was reporting an article about her quest to become New York's ambassador to loneliness. That's how we met. And then that professional relationship morphed into a friendship. And that again transformed into this collaboration for the book. So it was fast, it was furious, it was full of depth. And I do. I miss my friend.
Yeah, I'm sure. Why was it that after talking about sex for so many years, she decided to pivot?
Well, I think that she had always known that she was expert in overcoming hardship and loneliness. She lost her entire family in the Holocaust.
Yeah.
She was alone. By the age of 10, she lost her parents and her grandparents. And so she spent a lifetime cherry picking, selecting, going after friends to form her own family of choice. And she did that over and over again. So by 96, by the time we lost our dear Dr. Ruth, I consider myself the latest pickup, right? I was the latest friend that she picked up and added to her chosen family. And she did this with incredible purpose. These weren't accidental friendships. She was proactive. And so she had something to say.
When you lay out the book, you start with what you guys termed her menu for connections. It's basically a pie chart. And self is the biggest piece of the pie, with family, friends, lovers, community taking up smaller parts. And then we have technology off to the side. Can you break this down for me?
Well, I think the menu for connection is a brilliant structure for Dr. Ruth to communicate what she felt are the most important ingredients for living a full, connected, and rich life. Not just financially, but we could talk about that too, how one leads to the other. But of course, this meaningful connections, living as a way of piecing together longevity, to live longer, to be healthier. So you are right. There are these different components. Self is the biggest. And the reason why self is the biggest, because it all starts from us. We all have the power, Dr. Ruth would say, to engage, to make a change, that we all have agency. And what she would say, which I love so much, is that loneliness, guess what, is curable. And we have the power to make a difference in our own lives. And sure, friends and family, yes, play a role. Lovers, of course, play a role. Community, neighbors, neighborhoods play a role. And technology, we should get into, because you might wrongly assume that a 96-year-old would say, get off your cell phones. That's not what Dr. Ruth would say. So we can definitely get into technology too.
Well, I'd love to start there, because as I woke up this morning, I read yet another story about some young person who traded in their smartphone for a dumb phone, a flip phone, and said it has changed their life for the better. So where did Dr. Ruth put technology?
She would be squarely in the camp of saying the following: as long as we use technology to drive in-person connection, that is the best and highest use of our cell phones, of our laptops, of the apps that we all rely on. That in the absence of in-person connections, which she would say would always be the most important, that's where we get into trouble. So if we deny ourselves access to the virtual world, let's say, to make dates or send a group text to get together with specificity, by the way, always make a concrete plan to get together. Don't just say sometimes. She was all about concrete details. If we can use it as a tool to fuel seeing our friends up close, in person, over a meal, for a cup of coffee, those are worth it. And that, by the way, translates to in-person connections in the professional setting as well.
Well, not just in-person connections in the professional setting, but as you were talking, I got a good sense of perhaps how Dr. Ruth would also choose to allocate her financial resources, right? When we're talking about spending time with people over a meal, on vacation, even taking time off work to spend time with people, we're also talking about money. We're talking about either using money or using time, which means that we're not making money in that moment. What was her philosophy about? I mean, clearly she did very well financially, but what was her philosophy about her money and the best way to use it?
I think she lived by example. She lived in the same apartment in Washington Heights, a neighborhood of New York City, for more than 50 years. That is where we conducted all the interviews for this book. That is where I got to know my friend, Dr. Ruth. That's where we shared cups of coffee, and she would always offer me cookies and cake and chocolates. And she could have lived more robustly, more richly, more lavishly, but she instead chose to live within a community that she established when her children were so young, where she was a young single mother. She stuck, she stayed. It was a community at that time when she first got there that was full of German Jewish immigrants. So she found her people. And for everyone listening, those people can be different people, but she found her people where she established roots. And for her, a bigger, brighter apartment wasn't going to be fulfilling. It was the neighbor next door who she got to say hello to in the hall, who she read into the elevator. And so I think she lived how we can follow. And I love that example.
If you are looking to find your people, Dr. Ruth, of course, had some great suggestions. Let's say that we have moved to a new place, or that our friends have moved to a new place and we are now looking to forge some new connections. Or even if we just feel like our current friendships are not giving us what we need anymore, what would Dr. Ruth say about that? And what does being the turtle mean?
She had a bunch, she collected a bunch of miniature turtles over the course of her lifetime. When I say collected, I mean really collected. She had hundreds of them in her apartment, probably very few that she bought for herself, to be honest. They ended up being gifted to her. And these were adorable. These were multicolored, some with gems and rhinestones all over her house. And what the turtle to her symbolized is that ultimately you must, as a turtle, stick your neck out sometimes and take a risk. In the conversation that we're having about forging meaningful connections, what could that look like? Here's just one example that you may find so fun coming from Dr. Ruth, but it's so true. When you go to a restaurant and you're in a new place, it might be very, easy to get a table for one. And then you're sitting by yourself, and that could sometimes feel really awkward when the people around you, of course, are dining in groups or dining at least on a date or in twos. What she would say, go have dinner and sit at the bar. At the bar, no one is made to feel alone or isolated. At the bar, to your left and to your right are conversation partners. And in front of you, you can have a conversation with the bartender. The U.S. Surgeon General has said that so many of us are living alone these days and really don't have many people to talk to over a meal. And so just by having dinner, not at a table at a restaurant, but choosing to have dinner at the bar, I had never thought of that. I think it's brilliant.
Oh, that's what I do when I'm traveling for work. I mean, you travel for work, and I guess sometimes the move is to say, oh my gosh, I've had such a day, I'm going to order room service. But generally, I get myself down to the bar. I sit there, I talk to somebody. I'll bring a book in case there's nobody who wants to talk to me. But I I've had such interesting conversations with a shipping magnate when I traveled to Geneva and, like really interesting people.
And she would say too, by the way, when you're talking about travel and going on business trips, she loved, as she would say, picking up people on planes. So the seatmate next to her, they became actually business leads. She actually booked people on her show based on conversations she had with just the seatmate next to her. And she would readily admit, listen, back in the day, back in the 1980s, when I was doing the most traveling, of course, we did not have our cell phones for distractions. We didn't have endless TV shows to stream on the seat back in front of us. She was not naive. She knows the headwinds that we are facing today to make connections. But she would say, listen, it's not all or nothing. She never preached abstinence either, right? It's not yes or no, black or white. What she would say, you know what? Watch some TV, scroll on your phone a little bit, but you know what? At some point during the flight, say hello to the person who's sitting next to you. You don't know where that conversation should go. And for her, she met some attorneys that she used for work through conversations on the plane. And so she really, these fun stories that she shared in this book, I had so much fun learning about Dr. Ruth's personal life, not just her professional life.
Earlier in the show, we talked about navigating friendships when money problems were getting in the way. It's really hard with a lover as well, with a partner, with a spouse. I've seen a lot of surveys that say money is harder to talk about than sex. What would she say about that? I tend to think when you learn how to talk about one difficult topic, whether it's sex or politics or health or in-laws, it gets easier to talk about the other difficult topics just because you've sort of proven that you're not going to die. How would she approach it?
You know, I found this really interesting, Jean. I think, surprisingly to me, that sometimes the lonelier people, the loneliest, are those who are involved in relationships, but that relationship has so many barriers to intimacy emotionally. I'm not just talking about physically, barriers to emotional intimacy, where of course this financial conversation can come in. And she'd be the first to say, I am not a medical doctor. Dr. Ruth was a behavioral therapist. And what she would say, go to someone smarter than perhaps the two of you. Seek advice if you're reaching an impasse. And she thought the idea of seeking support was a sign of strength, not a sign of weakness. But in order to get there, communication has to take place, authenticity, the conversation. I know I listen to your podcast all the time. We need to be honest with our financial goals, how we want to raise our children, the values that we want them to learn, the financial lessons that we want them to hold dear. So those conversations must take place. And if you're having trouble, Dr. Ruth would say, go see somebody, because there is help out there, going back to agency and having power to make changes in your life that can bring you joy and happiness.
Now that you have had the experience of spending a year-ish in the company of Dr. Ruth, I'm wondering how you've changed.
Oh, I love this question. So one of the most remarkable things, and I feel emotional recalling this, and the first time she said it, it struck me. She would end every visit we had with a question. And she would say, when will I see you again? This question was disarming because it communicates so much. Not only did we have to make a date because we were, of course, working together, but it did more than that. On the spot, it made me feel seen. Mm-hmm. It made me feel valued. It made me feel that she couldn't wait until the next time. And I feel that for me, I took that to heart, because tied up in that question too, when will I see you again, is this undercurrent that I am a priority, that I'm important to her. And so for a recent birthday, I made sure to reach out to my friends, to communicate to them, a very small group, to make sure they knew how important they were to me. And I invited them over for a concrete day-long celebration so I could tell them on my birthday how much they mean to me.
I love it. We will leave it there, and we will hope that we will see you again soon. The book is The Joy of Connection. Allison Gilbert, thank you for writing it. Thank you for telling us your story and hers.
I am so grateful to be here. Thank you so much, Jean.